I've thought about doing a podcast for a little while, and I've decided to do a 8-week mini series where we just sort of host live conversations. And it's great for me because it gives me a chance to practice long form content and having conversations when people are watching, which is fairly uncomfortable for me. And and it also gives me a chance to bring on some amazing people who can share their perspectives and hopefully provide some cool education and information for people who are interested in joining. So this platform's super. There's a lot of different stuff that can happen on here. There are several people in the queue. So right now, Megan and I are on stage, and you can join the queue. It's a sort of like the equivalent of walking up to the microphone and saying, "Hey, I have a question." And if you'd like, we can put you on stage with us and you can talk with us. You can ask a question. So if you would like to do that, maybe just sometimes people fall into the queue on accident. So if you would like to join us and ask a question or talk or share your opinion, please just mention in the chat that you would like to. And otherwise, yeah, I think that let's just dive right into this. So Megan, I'm learning this platform myself. It's a new platform, super. But I had this up. I don't know what happened to it. Did you click, Megan?
Oh, I changed it.
Okay, all right.
Our faces were so small. I was like, what happened?
I had a suspicion. No, that's perfectly all right. It's better with us. But yes, I just wanted to bring this up to show you. It's okay. Please feel free to play around. There actually is a lot of cool stuff you can do. You can do a random thing. I don't want to do it, but the button random, you can see it will bring you a random person from the audience onto the stage with us, which can be a little bit startling, maybe if you're the person. So yes, Joanne. So your faces are small again.
Oh yeah, that's my grandma.
Oh, thank you for being here, Joanne.
Both of my grandmas are here.
Awesome. Oh, that's marvelous.
And they're both in the queue.
Well, if you have anything to say, please just let me know.
And my grandpa.
We can introduce you to the stage. So it's Women's History Month, and of course, women have contributed many amazing contributions to science and medicine throughout history. And my goal with this episode, I suppose we're calling it, is to draw attention to those things. And frankly, I am not tone deaf enough to not recognize that I am a white man. So this is essentially not my place to be speaking. Megan has a wonderful history of really being a true champion for women in science and people from underrepresented groups and historically excluded groups through this Reclaim the Bench podcast, which is so cool. Maybe we should start by just introducing that podcast. And actually, just for anyone, I promise this is not like a Reclaim the Bench sponsored plug or anything like that. It's just genuinely a phenomenal podcast. So please,
thanks, Ben.
Tell those people. Yeah, I was just listening to it today, and I really love it. So please tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to say that I also am not a part of many of the groups that we do discuss on the podcast. So for example, I'm not a person of color, and we discuss different ethnicities and LGBT status, etc. So for me, I can speak as a woman in science, but I just want to be clear that that is just one perspective of many. So on the podcast, what we're really trying to do is bring attention to those stories in the history of science and medicine that you probably haven't come across. So moving beyond like Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein to those people who had to overcome a lot of significant challenges in the social culture of their time to contribute to science and medicine. So we cover some really amazing women in science. And I know Ben was listening to the episode on Rita, Levi, Montalcini today. She's one of my favorites. So we had about 7 episodes, and Jamal and I have been hoping to make more. We hope to eventually, but right now that's what we've got. And as you know, Ben, life gets pretty busy as a scientist. But I think it's just an awesome way to bring attention to those people who might not have had those stories told.
Yeah, I really, I hope that you will, the heavens will part and you will find more time to make more episodes. I'm sure there are probably an endless number of stories out there to tell.
Seriously.
I actually am curious. I never asked you this before. And just I already said this, but Megan and I are friends. So we speak outside of the context of live events. I've never asked you this question though. How do you select the stories? Like, how do you navigate to them? In that inherently you are discussing untold stories. How do you discover them in the first place?
The first one we told was about this man who is known as the father of gynecology, J. Marion Sims. And I remembered hearing very briefly about his story and how he experimented on enslaved women. And that was just like a footnote. Like, oh yeah, he just did all of his experiments on enslaved women. It's fine, moving on.
No big deal.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, wait a minute, there's got to be more to that story. And then the more we dug into it, there was a lot more to it. Unfortunately, like you said, they're kind of like untold stories. So some things we want to cover and we run into, there's hardly any information on the topic at all. So some things like people would suggest to us, that's how we got some of our ideas. Others, we might have, Jamal really likes to read biographies, so he might have heard of people that way. Or like I minored in gender and sexuality and women's studies in undergrad, so I have kind of like an ear to the ground for, I guess, historically underrepresented groups. But yeah, unfortunately, sometimes we just can't find that much about people because they were not given the attention they deserved in their time.
Yeah, and I mean, easier said than done, but it would be really cool if at some point, somehow, you could identify a situation where the story is told a certain way, but you can tell there's something more to it. And you could sort of find someone who lived through it and bring them on to tell the story from their perspective. That would be really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe one day, but that requires some serious
when we can time travel.
Yes. Right. I'm thinking of something, within
modern
recent
day
history.
Yeah.
Where they would be alive. But it would be even cooler if you did discover time travel and used it for such good purposes.
I am doing it in my spare time, so yeah. We haven't talked about that so far.
It's not
in
really
beta testing.
Time travel.
Yeah.
No big deal. Just a small side project. But yeah, I understand, things get busy at the lab. Doing a PhD is no small feat. Doing an MD is no small feat. And doing an MD PhD is a very large feat. So I understand that things get wild. And also, for the record, Jamal will be a guest in a few weeks down the road. He's going to be talking about genetics and all sorts of stuff. So we will have both hosts of Reclaim the Bench on at separate times. So it's just such a great show that the hosts have so much good stuff to talk about. So I'm going to move over to the media stage, and I want to pull up a photo of Rita. I love this photo. I think it's so cool. And it's funny because in this photo, she's actually in a laboratory, it appears, but for much of her work, she wasn't. And this is such a great story. As you mentioned, I listened again to your podcast episode just this morning to reflect back on the story because it's incredible. Would you like to, sort of tell the story a little bit or explain the introduction to it and how she got her start?
Yeah, sure. So Rita Levi Montalcini was born in Italy in, I believe, the 1920s. 1910s, 1920s, somewhere around there. So she was not encouraged to pursue a science career. It was pretty much the opposite. Her family did not want her going into science. It just wasn't something that women did 100 years ago. But she was super passionate about it, and I eventually won her parents over, especially her father, I guess, who controlled the finances, to go to school to become a scientist. And so she started to work in science, and then World War II occurred, basically. So she was Jewish. That was, and important part of her identity. And obviously during World War II, this meant that she had to go into hiding. So her family had to flee the town they were living in Italy and hide out with friends for several years in like their attic with fake passports. And she brought her lab equipment with her when she was fleeing for her life from the Nazis and Mussolini in Italy. And she was doing this research on chicken embryos, so like fertilized eggs, just in this like small space that she was hiding out in for several years. And during this time, she completed really important experiments that actually led to the discovery of something called nerve growth factor, which is a signaling molecule that causes nerves to grow during development. This was a game-changing discovery, and she made it not in a lab like Ben was saying, like not what's pictured here, but just in a bedroom, essentially. And from there, after World War II, she went on to have an astonishing career and ended up winning a Nobel Prize, which is extraordinarily rare for women, which is a whole other thing about how women are less recognized for their accomplishments and achievements. But she's one of those few women who were. And she is just has been an inspiration to me because she lived through so much hardship and was so passionate about the work that she did that she didn't let the people trying to persecute her prevent her from her studies. And it's just an incredible story.
It's so incredible. And I found myself listening to the episode and again now wondering about the decision to bring her lab with her under circumstances of incredible fear and trauma and disaster. I mean, it gives me the chills actually, just thinking about it. I wonder if it was that she had a sense that there was really something there that she needed to discover and felt that she was maybe on the edge of it, or maybe it was her purpose. The only options I see are that, or she is just she was so devoted to science and her career and felt that it was absolutely her purpose to continue this work regardless of the circumstances. I just find that so amazing.
I feel like it probably wasn't so much of a bent towards like career, like progression, because at the time no one knew what the outcome of anything was going to be. Like she didn't know that the Nazis weren't going to win the war and Jewish people would be more safe in a few years. Like, I think what you said at first, like she probably was just she felt like there was something there that she really had to find out, and was on that path and found it to be her purpose.
Yeah. And it turned out that she was right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There was something there. And also, which is what the image I'm showing here that we can talk about, but it makes me wonder, her story is so incredible. In my opinion, it's not because she discovered this incredible thing. Of course, that's amazing. And that is a huge part of it. But the fact that, like Joanne just said in the chat, she sounds like the definition of passion. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. This drive to continue working in this situation is unbelievable. And her research was highly successful and impactful. But I'm certain that there were probably many other individuals who did the same as she did, but we don't know their stories because they didn't discover nerve growth factor.
Exactly.
It's amazing. And I'm so glad that she gets the recognition that she got the recognition, the Nobel Prize that she absolutely deserved.
But I think that you make a really good point. Like, for every story that we know about, there's probably tens or even hundreds of people who went completely unnoticed, and maybe we're just as passionate and driven and intelligent, but as you know, science is very much a gamble, and sometimes we can follow one thread for several months or even several years and find basically nothing, or it can be a life-changing, field-changing discovery. So that's what you get when you go into science, and that's what makes it exciting, but also frustrating.
Yeah. And I also wonder when she made that decision, say, you know what, I'm going to do this research in my bedroom.
Yeah.
I really wonder about the nuance. I wonder if anyone's ever asked her about that. If there's an interview that somewhere, I wonder if like she, as soon as she had to flee, she said, you know what, I'm taking everything with me. Or I wonder if it was more like kind of how at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, when we're all sort of isolated, we kind of found new ways to use ourselves. And I wonder if she was sort of isolated and thought, I'm not happy right now. I know exactly what makes me happy. It's my research. And maybe so she found ways to do it. I wonder.
You're probably right. Yeah. I mean, she did just use like the chicken eggs that the family friend she was staying with brought home for her to do her work on. Like she just had to get creative about how to pursue her passion. And yeah, I mean, like at the beginning of the pandemic is when we started Reclaim the Bench, because that was something we were really passionate about. And I think you started to get more into your science communication, and everyone was kind of finding those different outlets. So yeah, that's a pretty good parallel, really.
Yeah, except obviously much less extreme. Probably not appropriate to equate the pandemic to World War II, but it is.
No, it was
It's
a period of
similar.
isolation. I think that that is, yeah, obviously not the same kind of like duress, but
Yeah. Well, this Joanne asked a good question. Was she all self-taught? And I know the answer to that is no, because I listened to the episode. But Megan, would you like to answer
that's
that?
right. Yeah, so she did go to school to become a scientist, and then she worked with under some scientific mentors prior to the war and also afterwards. So prior to, she was in Italy, and then after that, she moved to the United States to work with a scientist here for a while, and then ended up working in the US and Italy. So she had schooling. That was something that she had to convince her father to let her do, because he just wanted her to get married and settle down. So
Well, so to give more context to the folks here who are not neuroscientists, and when you go to school for neuroscience and biology, I think everyone learns about nerve growth factor, or at least BDNF, these growth factors. Let's talk about the image here. Have you seen this image before, Megan?
I actually haven't.
Okay, so and frankly, I haven't either until today. But I was just wondering if you came across this in preparation for the episode. But what we are seeing here is, I assume, I'm going to surmise, what you described in the episode, that these tumors, they express this nerve growth factor, and they draw nerves to grow towards them. And that was a key discovery in her research, was that for some reason brain cells wouldn't typically grow in a certain direction unless she discovered this certain factor was present. But the tumors would attract this incredible dense innervation from brain cells, and that's what's shown on the right. It's incredible. I mean, you can see they're all projecting into the tumor in the center, which again, brain cells don't typically do unless they have some sort of reason to do so. In this case, a growth factor saying, "Hey, come on over here. Party's over here, everyone. Let's send your axons this way." So it's really, truly a fundamental component of understanding how the nervous system develops and how brain cells function.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think one way to understand it is, I think most people know that we have hormones circulating in our blood. So these are proteins that go throughout your body and signal different cells what to do. So, like, for example, if you have the sex hormones, that's what causes puberty. And if you have like adrenaline, that's what causes your fight or flight response. So like your muscles get all tense and you're ready for action. So those are proteins that circulate throughout the body and bind to different cells. growth factors are very similar. They are proteins that are secreted, so they're released from one cell type, and they're only released in a localized area. So that's the difference between hormones, which go throughout your body, and other types of factors in the body. So it's very localized. So what they found were these tumors were releasing these proteins that were causing the growth of the neurons directly into the tumor. And people didn't actually know that proteins released from cells could signal the growth of other cells. So that's why it was such a game-changing discovery. And it's something that it's a fundamental principle of biology, really.
Yeah, and it's also another way to think of this is like you have your brain, of course, and then you have your spinal cord, which runs all the way down your back. And shooting off from your spinal cord are all these nerves that control, again, I'm waving my hands around in the air right now. That's actually because a signal originates in my brain and says, wave those crazy hands. And then it shoots all the way down my spinal cord to my hands and actually controls the muscles and tells them to move. So you need to have, when your body is developing, you need to have signals that tell certain cells in the brain to send their projections all the way to this hand, and maybe particularly the muscle that controls my pinky versus my thumb or my feet.
Right.
So they're very important factors for just physical development of the body, in addition to other things. So yeah, critical discovery. So
exactly.
And then she moves to the United States, right? So why don't we talk a little bit about that section of her story, that chapter?
Honestly, you've listened to the episode much more recently than I've recorded it. So which part are you referring to exactly?
So I guess here, you know what, I'm going to go back to this. We're going to fast forward to her late life. So I was really amazed by, okay, just to fill everyone in, she comes to the United States after doing all this research, and she ends up working in the US for like 30 years in a specific position, and basically continuing to grow her impact and do these amazing things and make all these incredible discoveries. And to the point where she wins the Nobel Prize, which is, I'm pretty sure, the #1 most prestigious award you can win as a scientist for a discovery. I'm fairly certain. I can't think of anything else.
I would think so.
And she continues to work until she's 100 years old. Actually, going, I believe in the episode you said, so she went to one research lab in the morning, and then she would go to a different lab in the afternoon and work on a foundation, right? So she created a foundation.
So this was all in Italy. So she worked in the US for a little while, but then most of her later career, she was back in Italy.
And so at the end of her life, suppose she had a long life. She lived to 100. The last decade of her life, she it seems like she spent some of it giving back and building infrastructure for helping women in science. And I remember you mentioning that. Go ahead, please.
Oh yeah, so she was really big into mentoring and like you said, paving the road for the next generation of scientists, and especially women. And I think she also had her foundation helped African women who often did not have as many resources to get into science as like European women, for example. So she had this really strong consciousness of the fact that opening the door to more people opens the door to more discoveries. I think that's what's really important about diversity in science. Like at this point, it's just become a buzzword, but the reason why it's important to have people from so many different backgrounds contributing to our research is because everyone brings a different perspective, and those different perspectives are what help you develop those creative ideas that take us to the next level, or even think about what's important to study in the first place. So she recognized, probably because of her own struggles, that people who come from these historically underrepresented or looked down upon in the past backgrounds have this amazing insight that they can bring to the table which is super important. And I really admire her for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've experienced that myself. In the lab, just having conversations is always tremendously valuable. I have found overwhelmingly that when I have a sort of a wall, I meet a wall in my research, going and having a conversation with a diverse group of people and getting a range of opinions is always vastly better than sitting and thinking myself and maybe reading papers. And if everyone at that table is a white male from the same place with the same background, it's not going to be much better than me sitting and experiencing whatever I can come up with in my white male brain. So, this is a super aside, but someone said in the chat, Adam said, "Jazz hands. Can you explain the neurology of a patient who has lost a limb, but their brain can still feel it?" I kind of want to talk about this for a second. It's because it's a pretty cool thing. When there's something called phantom limb, when let's say if you have an arm amputated or you have a hand, let's say at the wrist, some people will still experience, they will feel like the fingers are still there, the hand is still there when it's not. And sometimes they will experience pain. It's called phantom limb pain. And I actually don't know the truth about this. I really normally I wouldn't make a video about this on the internet without checking first. But as far as I understand, the lack of nerve impulses essentially from the hand to the parts of the brain that sense the hand cause dysfunction of those brain cells. And so they start to produce spontaneous activity to sort of stay alive, and just because they're like, what the heck's going on? I haven't felt this thing in weeks. And so that spontaneous activity can cause you to feel weird sensations in whatever limb it is. So Megan, can you confirm from what
that's my understanding of it too. Like you said, your brain really does not like a lack of stimulus, that it kind of panics. And
right.
It's kind of similar to like if you lay there awake with your eyes closed for a really long time, you might start to see like different colors, even though there's nothing actually there. It's just your cells your brain kind of makes its own stimulation. And one really cool thing about phantom limb pain, do you know how they help people experience it less severely? So they will actually have people, like, to use your example, if it's the wrist, let's say the left wrist is amputated. If they put their right hand in front of a mirror and put the amputated wrist in a box behind the mirror, and then look at the mirror and watch their right hand, the still present hand moving, it will look like the left hand. And the left hand is obscured, the lack of the left hand is obscured because it's behind a box. And that actually fools the brain back into thinking that the hand is present, because you have the visual stimulus that your left hand is moving. And this actually helps people experience less phantom limb pain.
Wow. That's really interesting. I recently saw a video. It was just one of those like viral, neat videos where they had people, if they were sitting, they would put like a wall here so that their arm was blocked off. And then they would put a fake arm on the table and make it like connected so it looked like it was their arm. And then they like took a lighter and like held it near the fake arm, and they were like, "Can you feel the heat?" And the people like said that they could feel it. And I think, they threatened basically to like hit the arm or hurt it.
Yeah.
And the people were like, "Oh, I really don't like that. Like, please don't do that." And it's just kind of funny. And a similar one where they were like, "We have a laser here that will heat your skin really, really hot." And they put it on their arm and like, "Can you feel the heat?" And they're like, yeah, take it off. And it wasn't actually doing anything. It's just sort of funny how sensation can be manipulated by expectation.
Oh yeah. Our brains are pretty easily fooled.
Yeah, I had something happen. You know what happened to me yesterday? I got in my car and I was pulling out of a parking spot and I put it in reverse, took my foot off the brake, expecting it to idle backwards. And it started moving, and I'm like, okay. And I'm like, why is it moving so slow? Like, why am I not coming out of this spot? But I'm like, the car is moving in reverse. And I looked down and it was still in park. And it was like, my brain had told me that because I thought I put it in reverse, I actually sensed the car moving in reverse when it really wasn't. It was really, really weird. I'm glad I remembered that so I could talk somewhere about it, because otherwise I would have forgotten it entirely. Okay, so that was a fun little aside about phantom limb. It's just what happens when you get two neuroscientists together. We have to talk about something about the brain. We can't just talk
I know,
about
we got to
history.
nerd out about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, Dr. Rita, did you say Levy, or because my instinct was
Levi?
Levy? Okay.
I don't know. It could be Levy. That's
Rita
probably
Levy.
my American accent.
Yeah.
Not
Well,
that you're not American, but
right. Her story is amazing. Was there anything else we wanted to add? I think just if the folks here could just give a round of applause in the chat for Rita and her amazing work. Thank you. Yes, there they go. In your other episodes, you also covered a few other stories that I wanted to bring up. I'm not sure if you wanted to touch on them at all. So the two that I looked at were Dr. Dorothy Brown and Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler. Not sure if you wanted to touch on those stories at all.
Yeah, sure. So Rebecca Lee Crumpler was the first African-American woman to get a medical degree in the United States. And she was a tireless advocate of especially like so this was, for some historical context, it was the mid 1800s. And even like African American people in general were not getting medical degrees. Women in general were not getting medical degrees. So the fact that she was able to, as a part of both of these groups, was really amazing. And she was a tireless advocate for the newly freed people who had been formerly enslaved. So she was raised in the northern United States, but ended up traveling to the South, I believe to Virginia, to help the newly freed people who were very poor. You know, basically, like when slavery ended in the United States, people were just kind of like left to the winds. And we could go into a whole thing about how that was, that set up the foundation for racism to continue today. But to keep it short, people didn't have any land, they didn't have any money, they didn't have any access to healthcare. And so when she went down there, she was able to use her expertise to provide healthcare, especially to women and children. And this was also, not only could they not afford healthcare, but the white doctors in the South often denied healthcare to these freed Black Americans. So in addition to that, to her amazing work, she wrote a book specifically for women about how to take care of their own bodies and their children's bodies. She wanted to make like medical knowledge accessible to the common person, which was very different than the culture of the time, where the doctors benefited from the common person not knowing how to take care of themselves, how to heal common ailments or anything like that, because the doctors, that would take away some of their business. So they didn't want to teach people how to do that. But she genuinely cared about their well-being and took her time to write this book for the common woman. And then Dorothy Brown was in the 1900s. She was a doctor, and she had grown up as an orphan, and was recognized at a young, or put herself through school at a young age, I should say. She was basically out on the streets and was homeless while she was trying to go to high school, but was able to find a foster home essentially to stay with people, and eventually worked her way through the school system. And she also ended up being an important advocate for women. So I think that's another common thread in the stories we tell, is that the people we talk about don't just pull themselves up and then kind of revel in how they were able to get there, but they put the ladder down behind them and make sure that there is an easier path for the people coming after them, so that the struggles of future women or future people of color are not as difficult as what they had to go through.
Absolutely. You know, that's an amazing point, and it is really intriguing in itself. And thank goodness that those people are doing that, because of course we don't want this to perpetuate. I want to ask you, having covered these many stories, the three that we've mentioned and then several others, this is one of those tough questions that you're not gonna have an immediate answer, but what have you learned? You know, I'm sort of curious, like, overall, what has learning about these stories taught you about science or the world or training in medicine and science? I'm just really curious.
I think one of the common factors, and we talk about this in the podcast too, was how resilient all of the people we covered were, and just how much that helped them through their challenges. I mean, resilience also has kind of been a buzzword, especially with COVID, but I think getting down to it, the ability to believe in yourself and your ability to contribute to the world is one of those fundamental things that a lot of us really have trouble with. And it's something that I have trouble with all the time. So I love that these people can serve as role models for that kind of ability to get back up in the face of challenge and believe in yourself. Not to be super cheesy, but I know it's hard not to.
It's not cheesy.
One of my favorite quotes from Dr. Dorothy Brown actually was, "Be tough, not hard." And I think about that all the time. Like if something's getting me down and I am just really frustrated about like the system of science, for example, and like academia, and how much I am really frustrated with it sometimes, and it makes you want to like close up and not be available to other people and not give your best self, really. And that's when I have to remember, like, it's not the time to be hard and closed off, and it's just the time to look at what needs to be changed and think about how we can do better.
That was Dr. Dorothy Brown. That was a quote from?
Yes.
Well, I'm sure she would be very proud that she could. I'm sure she would be very touched that she could inspire you. And that's absolutely right. And I totally agree with what you said about like this resilience and fighting through and persevering and believing in yourself, especially in the face of others, maybe even a societal structure telling you that you shouldn't believe in yourself and that people who are like you don't succeed. I can't even, I mean, again, I'm a white man, you know, I can't even imagine facing these struggles. And so, you know, the way I see it is I just want to do my best to understand and learn and be an ally and host these types of conversations to spread awareness about this type of stuff. There are people in the queue, and I'm not sure if anyone wants to join. So again, if anyone missed this in the beginning, you can join us on stage and ask a question or make a comment. So if you would like to, typically the way to indicate that is to join the queue, but we already have many people in here. So if you would like to, please just send a chat and I will pull you on stage. You can just turn your microphone on, or you can turn your microphone and your camera on if you'd like. So just let me know. I know Joanne is hanging out over here. I assume that if you have a question, just wave, because I can see you guys, by the way. I hope that you know that. So if not, let's move on to the next question. So I want to talk, we have talked about the history of women in science, and nowadays, you know, there are a lot of efforts being made to increase diversity and inclusivity, but a lot of this stuff still happens. And
yeah,
I wanted to ask you, Megan, you know, as a woman in science and in medicine, Again, if anyone missed it, Megan is an MD, PhD student. So she is training on both the clinical and the scientific sides and has experience in both. I want to ask, I mean, I've really, really enjoyed working with you throughout my time in the lab. Truly, you're one of the most intelligent and articulate people I've ever had the pleasure of working with.
Oh, thank you.
It's true. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, despite your clear talent and intellect, I wanted to ask if you have experienced, resistance and barriers because of your sex, and if you'd be willing to talk about that.
Yeah. It's definitely a tough question because it's not something that you want to think about, I guess. But looking back, like as I've gotten older, I have identified some of the ways where I have faced those kind of barriers. For example, when I was in undergrad, like if you want to go into science and medicine, usually you start doing your research in undergrad. And for the people who may not know, and usually that just means emailing a bunch of random professors and saying, hey, your research sounds really cool. Can I come work for free in your lab? And just seeing who will get back to you. And the person whose lab I ended up working in for 3 years, he said, so when I worked there was me and probably 4 other undergrad girls, women, young ladies, let's say. And he said he would only have undergrad women work in his lab because we didn't cause so many problems. And I thought that was weird at the time. And then looking back and seeing like how the undergraduate men who had worked in his lab, they ended up getting, like before he decided he was only going to take on girls, these guys had gotten several papers. They got great scholarships to go on to medical school. He would nominate them for awards. Apparently, he liked girls because we didn't ask for that. We didn't put the pressure on to be put on papers and to get awards and things like that. And so I worked there for 3 years. I did an extensive amount of work, and I was never put on a paper. I asked him several months in advance for my letters of recommendation for my MD PhD program, and he sent some of them in after the deadline had already passed. Despite the hard work that I did in his lab, he did not put nearly the same amount of effort into my success that he did into the other undergraduate boys. So essentially, when he said he only hired girls, he just wanted people to shut up and work, frankly. And that was super frustrating. Looking back and realizing like what I had experienced, and that affected my future career. Like I said, he didn't even get some of my applications in on time, so it narrowed the schools that would give me an interview.
Wow.
It looks like Fave wants to share something.
Fave, of course, please. I can feature you if you're comfortable. So that's a picture we're looking at. That's not actually a live camera. But Fave, if you please feel free to turn your microphone on or your camera on or both, or neither, and just say it in the chat. But please feel free. She may need a second actually to set up her.
Oh yeah.
Camera.
It took me quite a while. No, we can't hear you yet.
We cannot. You may need to fool around in the directly above you. There's a little settings gear, and you can change the audio inputs.
Yeah, for me, I had to try several of them.
Oh no.
Well, if you want to type it out, I mean, we can read it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me try this. Okay, there we go.
I also wanted to talk about, while you're doing that, I looked up some statistics about women in science, and one really interesting thing I came across was a 2019 study about grant funding, and they looked at first-time grantees from the NIH, which is the main institute that awards grants in the United States, and the percent of first-time women grantees was about 43%, which is about how many women were eligible. So that was pretty good. But the actual amount of funding that they were awarded, despite the same average number of publications and the same average number of citations, men on average got $165,000 for their first grant, while women got only $126,000. That's a 25% difference. And for science, that little bit of money is everything. I mean, that determines whether you can hire another grad student or postdoc. That determines whether you can invest in that equipment that you really need to do your experiment that will get you to the next level.
And especially when talking about a first grant, this is the money that you're using to build your lab and to build your career.
Exactly. And on top of that, women tended to get smaller startup packages on average from a university. So just in general, we tend to be put at a disadvantage from the very beginning, despite having the same resume, qualifications, things like that. So from then on, if you're looking for promotions and tenure, the man who got more money is going to have more ability to hire more people, to publish more papers, etc. So he will have more papers on his resume. So he will be fast-tracked to promotion, versus if the woman got 40,000 less, it's going to take her a little bit longer to get to that point. And then they may look at her record and say, you didn't have enough pubs over the past 10 years. Sorry, you're not being promoted for tenure. And this is one of the reasons why we have an extreme amount of attrition of women in STEM. Mm-hmm. The other reason, in my opinion, and from my reading, and again, this is just about women. This is not even considering people of color, LGBT, etc., who face additional barriers. But for women, family considerations are still a huge issue. And for a man, if you are married with kids, this actually makes you more likely to be hired. As a woman, it makes you far less likely. Even though this is technically illegal, if you don't say that's why you didn't hire someone, it's well known. Like, for example, if you're interviewing for residency interviews, you can't be pregnant, or they're not going to want you to come to this residency. Some people even say, don't wear your wedding ring if you're married and a woman. But for a man, it actually makes you more likely to get hired. So
I remember reading something similar recently about, I think a paper came out in Nature maybe, and it was like, I forget what the metric was. It might have been like the number of papers per year, or the number of, like, the likelihood of securing tenure or something like that. And it was basically like men, women, and then like without any children, and like women with one child, women with two children. And it just like steeply declined immediately. Yeah. And I think that's another thing. And, the burden of childcare, and there basically need to be more resources available for aiding parents, and especially mothers, and especially single mothers.
Absolutely. Yes. I could go on about this, but it looks like Fave fixed
the
issue. So.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome to the stage.
Okay, Ben, bro, I adore your content, man. I love you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fave.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say, Megan, I completely hear you in regarding to whatever you said about discrimination, let's call it, even though it's not 100%. But you have to understand that in order to move forward, we have to, I hate I'm saying this, but we have to accept, but also be optimistic that the next generation is what we need to focus on. So this is actually going to go past, and I don't want any woman to be discouraged or hold on to these
Yes.
kind of concepts. We are moving away from it. I mean, look how far we've come, right? I come from a family. My mom got married when she was 17, and
Mm-hmm.
she had my sister when she was 18. She didn't have a choice. So, but here I am. I got education, and I mean,
Mm-hmm.
not the one I wanted because I couldn't afford to become a doctor, but but people like Ben are helping me. So we've come so far. So gratitude
Yeah.
at these moments are very helpful. If that man doesn't see the potential in you, you find someone that will make you shine, right? You keep
Yeah.
going on, and I just, in my opinion, I feel like we shouldn't even talk about this anywhere. I mean, I know people always fire shots at me for this, but I listen to a lot of Jordan Peterson and what he's about to, like, what he talks about, what women go through, and you could take parts of it and make your own spiel to it. And I think end of the day, science is done by humans, and there's always going to be biases, right? End of the day, we believe that the earth goes around the sun until someone comes and proves it wrong. So it's going to have these um, precursor opinions on every basis that we know. It's hard to dissect them. So what we can only do is find people that work with us and will value our potential for the sake of advancing science. You know what I mean? So I really don't want people like you to get discouraged. Keep going, Megan. And that's all I gotta say.
Well, thank you, Fave. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your kind comments, and I appreciate you stepping on stage and sharing that. So thank you.
Can you hear me? My computer froze.
I can hear you. I can't see you though, or I can see you, but you're frozen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as long as you can hear me.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thanks for
you're
sharing.
frozen on a very. It looks like you're posing for a photo. You're smiling. It's perfect.
Okay. Good. It's not like an ugly one.
It's not like a weird. Yeah, you could try like flipping on and off your camera. I'm not sure if it will.
No. My entire Chrome browser's frozen. But as long as you can hear me.
Oh no.
So yeah. Thank you for your comments. I think it's a little bit like I said at the beginning. It's not. I don't think any of us, it's not helpful to like dwell on the discrimination that we may have experienced. I think you're absolutely right about that. However, I think it's also important to call attention to, because sometimes we don't know what we're facing until we actually name it.
Oh, okay. I was muted myself. That was completely just my fault. Okay, so while Megan, assuming you can hear me now, you're gonna have to restart your Chrome browser because I can't hear you or see you. Everything's completely gone now. Thank you, Adam and Fave, for telling me that. I didn't scroll down in the chat. In the meantime, while we're waiting for Megan to get back in, does anybody want to step on stage and say anything or hang out or make any comments or ask any questions? I don't actually have my phone on me to text Megan. Any brave souls with any comments? Oh, thank you. My assistant just brought me my phone, aka my fiance. Thank you, Bella. Okay. How did you both meet? Great question, Fave. Thanks for asking. We worked together in our when I was doing my PhD at University of Buffalo, Megan was and still is an MD PhD student there. So we worked together in the lab, and we actually collaborated on several projects. So Megan was not only, the person who I shared lunches with most days, but also the person who, we really worked together a lot on several research projects. So it was really awesome. And, now I left and I'm into my postdoc, but Megan should be finishing up fairly soon with her PhD. And you know what? When she comes back, I might ask her about this, but I'm going to explain a little bit about what she's doing, an MD PhD. So, because people always ask about this, and I think it's really important for students to understand, you can do a PhD or you can do an MD. PhDs, you do research, you do take classes, but you get, Megan's back.
Oh, okay. I think I have to do it on my phone. My laptop is really old and it literally just crashed. So.
Is it the same one that you always had?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
sure
of course it is.
is.
Well, when you exited, I've started talking about what MD PhDs are, and I was just explaining how a PhD petition to sponsor a new laptop. Yes, or maybe Dr. Yan.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Yet.
We don't get paid enough.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. So PhD, you do get paid. Surprisingly, so people often think PhDs are expensive, but you actually, for a neuroscience PhD, you get paid. But an MD, under any normal circumstance, sorry, my dog is here now and barking, you pay, and it can be, of course, very expensive. An MD PhD, you do both an MD and a PhD in one large thing that Megan can absolutely talk about. But the benefit is that you don't pay for the MD, and that you do still get paid, right, as a PhD student?
Yes.
Yeah. So please, maybe let's talk about this for just a few minutes. Can you tell folks about your experience and what it's like, maybe the structure of the program? I think that's also important.
Yeah, sure. Definitely, because it's not a very common program, and a lot of people don't really know it's an option. I didn't know it was an option until well through college. So it's essentially the goal of an MD PhD program is for you to be practicing both as a physician, seeing patients some of the time, and doing research with the rest of your time, which is it takes a lot of dedication, I should say, throughout the entire path and then during your later career. The path, so first you have to get your bachelor's, and then, like Ben said, you could, after your bachelor's, you could get an MD or you could get a PhD. If you are really passionate both about like seeing patients as a doctor and about doing research, these combined programs are a great way to do that. So on average, it takes 8 years, usually 7 to 9 is the range. And you do 2 years of med school, typically, sometimes like a year and a half, and then your PhD. And the PhD part is a little bit shorter than a typical PhD because a lot of the classes you took during med school will like cross transfer, so you don't have to take so many classes. But other than that, it is a full PhD. You do several years, 3 to 5 years worth of research, prepare a dissertation, which is a summary of all of the work that you've done, and defend your dissertation. Then you go back to medical school for, depending on the program, either 2 or 2.5 years. So altogether, med school is 4 years, and some programs split it up a little bit differently. But at this time, you go into the clinical rotations and learn about all of the different aspects of medicine. So that is kind of the point I'm at now. I'm preparing to write my dissertation and defend it, and then I'll go back to med school this summer. And then after that, then you do residency and usually fellowship, which is 4 to 6 years more. And then finally, the goal is to be hired at an academic medical center, so like a university, and run a lab and see patients. So throughout that time, throughout the MD PhD program, you are paid a stipend, usually something about $30,000, which is, and you don't have to pay your tuition. So financially, it's pretty nice if you plan to do both of those degrees anyway, because yeah, MDs are extremely expensive, and that's a whole other problem that we could go into. But yeah, if it's something that you're interested in, the MD PhD sets you up pretty nicely for research and seeing patients.
Yeah, and I will point out for both anyone interested to be aware, and also to toot Megan's horn, it is incredibly competitive to get into an MD PhD program. As we know, it's really difficult to get into med school. It's really difficult to get into a PhD program. So just imagine them both combined. It's really, really competitive. And yeah, Megan crushed undergrad from what I understand. And just, was a highly competitive applicant. Did you not have a 4.0? You did, right?
I got an A- once.
Oh no! So
I had like a 3.997 or something.
Oh no! Well, it's still pretty good.
Thanks,
of course,
thanks. I didn't quite get to the 4.0 though. But
no, that's funny enough. I
yeah,
have a
and also
story.
MD PhD programs have some of the least diversity. MD, we're about half and half in terms of women and men. And PhD in biological fields, I think we're also about half and half. But in terms of gender diversity and racial diversity, MD PhDs are still dominated by the white and male, etc. The typically overrepresented groups in medicine, shall we say.
Right. So being a very successful woman in medicine and science, I want to ask you, what would you tell your younger self if you could give advice or maybe just send a message? Again, I'm sorry, this is one of those questions where it's hard to produce a good answer immediately. But does anything come to mind, something that's really been sort of transformative as a mindset for you?
I think it kind of comes back to what I was saying before about having that deep-seated belief in yourself, because when you don't necessarily have the most supportive mentors in the field, like I didn't in my younger days, and don't really know if you have what it takes to succeed. Like before I came to grad school, I was absolutely terrified that I would be horrible at it, that I would never be able to run an experiment, and I would never be able to come up with a single idea. And just, I had all of these misgivings about my own capabilities, which was dumb because I had a great track record and I did have ideas, and there were plenty of reasons why I should have believed that I could succeed. And this is also known as imposter syndrome, and it is more prevalent among people in underrepresented groups. So I think I would have told my younger self, and I would tell younger women out there, you have so much potential to contribute to whatever field you want to go into, whether it's science or medicine or some other group, some other field that you're really passionate about. Like, just because you don't follow the dominant mindset or you don't belong to the dominant group doesn't mean, in fact, it might mean that you have more capability to move it in a different direction and to see maybe those changes that need to be made. So, yeah, believe in yourself, even if it doesn't feel like the other people in your field are.
Very well said. I totally agree that, having faith in yourself is immensely powerful. That's sort of, again, in the context of me, not a woman in science, but I've always personally found that just like believing that at the end of whatever I'm working on, like the best outcome is what's going to happen has always, been really beneficial, I found. And again, that's me without facing the barriers and challenges that women face. And,
Well, all of us can, have self-doubts and everything. It doesn't matter who you are. So
yeah, true. I wanted to ask you, going back to what Faye was saying, I think women fantastically, not sure if that's the right word, have this tendency to prop up other women. I think I noticed a lot of like female-led labs, which have a lot of female trainees, and I love to see that. I think it's fantastic, but I also obviously think it's important for men to support women. So I want to ask you what your thoughts are on how can someone like me, a male in science, how can I work to make a more inclusive work environment for women or anyone really?
Yeah, I mean, as a peer, I mean, I think you did a great job. We're good friends, so you make a very inclusive space, and I think that just comes from treating women like people. More further down the line, I think more of it has to come from leadership. So like someone like you, when you're thinking about running a lab for the first time and you're thinking about who to hire, keeping in mind the fact that women receive less mentorship, that they might get less recognized in awards, things like that. When you're comparing two resumes of like a man and a woman, keeping in mind that maybe if she has a few less publications, this postdoc that you're thinking about hiring, that could be because of institutional or extrinsic factors and not because she's not as capable as the other candidate. And that goes all the way up. So we have hiring issues from basically the postdoc level all the way up to deans, and it only gets worse as you go. So the higher in leadership someone gets who might not be part of a dominant group, the more important your role becomes in promoting upward mobility of those groups. I think as men, so we talked about the family issue a little bit, like if we're talking about heterosexual couples, if you are a person who's in a relationship with a woman in science, keeping that, and my husband does a great job of this, so I can shout him out, making it easier for them so that just because they're a woman, they don't take on all the burdens of cooking and cleaning and childcare. That's like a small thing that you can do just if you're in that relationship with someone. But beyond that, advocating for parental leave in general is really important, because until we basically see fathers as equal parents, which under the law we don't really right now, like maternal leave is more valued, and for some medical reasons like that is necessary, but we need both parents to be treated equally. And so really advancing gender equity actually comes from advocating for parental leave in general, paternal and maternal, and seeing that that relationship as being important for both genders. So that's another thing. But these are all like big asks. So I think giving a platform like you're doing so that we can talk about these issues is also a great way to get more awareness out there.
Yeah, all great points. I was thinking, is it a big ask? Sorry, my dog's really noisy right now, making weird noises. Is it a big ask, to want more women in, higher positions in science and medicine? I don't think it's a big ask, but I do think it is a large feat to accomplish.
Yes.
And I think, just like you said, just helping, supporting, promoting women at all levels will hopefully build a culture where, what was the term you used? It was like something along the lines of like ascending or like going higher up. I don't know what it was.
Elevating? I don't know.
I don't know, something in there, but that's what I'm trying to say is basically, climbing the ladder basically and reaching higher positions.
Yes.
And as Faye said, like in social circles, putting the good word about women in your field, which gives them a better chance. Totally. I think, just anything like this is another good point. It's just promoting women and helping in any way, just being a supportive force, I think is perhaps, more powerful than, sorry about my dog again.
She really wants to get a word in.
Yes, she is. She's like, I can't believe you did a thing on women in science and didn't invite me. It's ridiculous. Well, Megan, I really appreciate you being here and you talking about not only these great stories in history, but also your personal story. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I hope that those who attended also enjoyed it. And I hope that there's a season coming out of Reclaim the Bench pretty soon. You might have to be thinking about it. No pressure, but the fans are chanting for a season 2. It's me.
They're clamoring.
But yeah, and really, we mentioned, let's see, I have their names here. I don't want to mess up. No, I deleted their names. Dr. Dorothy Brown and Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler. So those are another 2 episodes. I'm not sure where Megan just went, but please check out those episodes as well on Reclaiming the Bench and the Rita Levi Montalcini episode as well. There's so many good ones on there. So it's a great show. It's awesome. And Megan and Jamal are just so lovable as hosts. I don't know if it's just because I worked with the 2 of them and I know them, but I like when I listen to the episodes, Megan, I just feel like I'm there in the room with you guys, and I'm like, I miss them. It's so nice. So, but I really I really wonder about how that, like, the environment of you and Jamal talking is interpreted by people who don't know you, because I can just imagine sitting down at lunch with you 2 and like witnessing this conversation. But it's so funny because Jamal is just this like such a unique force. Like, he's a lot of the time, like, you're asking him, like, do you know what the difference is between veins and arteries? And he like gets it wrong. He's like, damn, it's so funny. It's the perfect dynamic. But so yes.
Yeah, I might make fun of him a little bit too much, but
I love the culture of the podcast, and it's like there'll be a word, some sort of medical term, and you like force Jamal to try to pronounce it, and he always gets it wrong. I love it. It's great.
I'm such a mean friend.
It's awesome. It's like Jamal's like the punching bag of the podcast. But it's wonderful. So everyone, you'll meet Jamal in a few weeks when we'll talk about genetics and the brain. So yeah, go check out Reclaim the Bench. I hope you'll think it is as funny and educational as I find it to be. So again, thanks everyone for showing love in the chat. I see a lot of thumbs flying and hearts, everything. So thank you. And
thanks, Megan, Ben, for having me. It was so good to talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to catch up and to hear about what's going on. So yeah, thank you again. And everyone, thank you for being here.